I never thought a quiet cup of coffee could turn into a showdown with people pretending to be the law, but that's exactly how my first morning at the cabin went. The sun was still low, a little mist curling up off the meadow, and I was finally starting to feel like this old place belonged to me. My uncle passed it down just a few weeks earlier, and I'd been taking it slow, easing into the quiet life he left behind. Then I heard engines, 3 SUVs rolling down my drive, lights flashing like some kind of budget police raid. A woman jumped out first, mid-40s, blonde bun pulled so tight it looked painful, clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon. She marched straight toward me and yelled, "You need to leave this property right now. You don't belong here." For a second, I thought maybe I was still half asleep, but then I noticed a guy in a reflective vest stringing yellow tape between my trees like he was setting up a crime scene. Another one was hauling cones and pretending to direct traffic. Now here's the kicker. This was my cabin, my land, legally mine with papers to prove it. And yet these people, these self-appointed enforcers, had stormed up like they owned the place. The woman introduced herself as Sandra Morton, chairwoman of the Maple Creek Homeowners Association, with the kind of voice that made you think she was used to telling waiters her order was wrong. Behind her, the man in the vest flashed a shiny badge that looked like something you win at a county fair. I held my mug steady, barely, and said, "Lady, this is my porch. Who exactly do you think you're talking to?" She snapped back that the HOA had received reports of unauthorized occupation, and they were here for a compliance inspection. Compliance inspection? On property that had been in my family since the 70s? I almost spit my coffee. The guy with the cones, his name turned out to be Daryl, looked nervous when I asked for credentials. Real nervous. The kind of nervous you don't see in actual law enforcement. His hands shook, his eyes darted like he was afraid I'd blow his cover. Meanwhile, Sandra pulled out some official-looking papers, waving them around without letting me read them. It was theater, plain and simple, and I could feel my blood pressure rising. Then I spotted it. Right on the property marker where my uncle had once planted birdhouses, there was a shiny new sign that read, "Chairwoman, Reserve Parking." That was it. I pulled out my phone, started recording everything. Daryl's badge, Sandra's clipboard, the cones, the tape. So, I said into the camera, "We've got volunteers pretending to be police, setting up fake checkpoints, and planting their own parking spots on private land. Anything else you want to add before I call the sheriff?" Sandra lunged at me, tried to block the camera with her clipboard. Her authority cracked right there, voice rising, words tumbling, all bluster but no backbone. That's when my neighbor Rebecca slowed down in her pickup, hanging half out the window. "What on earth's going on here?" she asked. And Sandra froze, because Rebecca wasn't just any neighbor. She was the one who kept track of HOA money. And from the look on her face, she'd seen enough of their games to know something smelled rotten. The convoy eventually pulled away, but not before handing me a phony violation report. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Later that morning, when the moving truck showed up, one of their SUVs was parked sideways across my driveway, blocking the whole thing. The driver just shrugged. Time was money, and he couldn't sit there all day. That's when I saw Sandra again, crouched behind an oak tree like some bad spy, watching me. Every time I moved, she moved, shifting trees, ducking low, whispering into a radio. Curiosity got the better of me, so I wandered the property line. Back near the old pump house, I found something strange, a wooden box with a ring of rusty keys labeled Facilities Access. My uncle must have left them. One key, after a lot of wiggling, popped open the pump house lock, and inside I found something I wasn't supposed to see, a filing cabinet stuffed with county documents, lease agreements, and signatures. Turns out the HOA had been renting this pump house and the mailbox cluster from my uncle for years. Monthly fees, renewal clauses, Sandra's name on every page. It hit me then, this was about money. They weren't here to check paint colors or lawn length. They were running a scheme, charging residents for fake patrols and pocketing cash under the cover of compliance. My uncle had been fighting them quietly, refusing to hand over more authority, and now that he was gone, they thought they could bulldoze me. That night, I laid out every paper on the dining table like I was planning a battle, because in a way I was. Receipts for radios and strobes, invoices for patrol gear no one had approved, bounce checks, overdrafts. My uncle had kept it all. He'd even written a note, in his scratchy handwriting. If they try to intimidate you, call the sheriff. These people have forgotten the difference between authority and theater. The next day, Rebecca called me. She'd been keeping her own records as treasurer, and they matched mine. Over $6,000 in shady expenses over just a few months. She sounded tired, almost guilty, like she'd been waiting for someone to compare notes. We agreed to meet at the next community gathering, which Sandra had scheduled right at the mailbox cluster on my property. Perfect stage for what was coming. So I showed up. About 15 neighbors stood in a circle while Sandra preached about community standards. I just sat down on the bench my uncle had built and said, "By all means, don't let me interrupt." Rebecca piped up, asking what specific responsibilities Sandra meant. Someone else asked about patrol services they'd supposedly been paying for. And then Grant, a neighbor who walked his golden retriever every day, casually mentioned he'd been recording audio for a nature podcast and picked up plenty of suspicious radio chatter about surveillance. You could feel the crowd shift, questions piling up faster than Sandra could deflect. That was when I knew it was time to bring in real authority. I called Deputy Tom Reynolds from the county sheriff's office, a man who specialized in property disputes. He agreed to swing by the next afternoon. So when Sandra and her crew rolled back up, setting up their little command post with folding tables and radios, Deputy Reynolds arrived in an actual marked cruiser. Badge, uniform, everything legit. Daryl strutted up to me with his fake badge out, demanding ID. The deputy stepped forward and said, "Come as you like. Can I see your credentials for conducting this inspection?" You should have seen Daryl's face. All the color drained away. He stammered about being a certified compliance volunteer. The deputy held up the badge, compared it to his own, and asked, "What agency issued this?" Daryl had no answer. Sandra tried to cut in, but the damage was done. She let her lapdog play cop in front of a real one, and there was no walking it back. Rebecca pulled out her folder of spreadsheets. Grant showed his recordings, and the deputy wrote everything down. At one point, he looked Daryl dead in the eye and said, "Impersonating law enforcement is a serious crime. You understand that, right?" Daryl looked like he might faint. Sandra just stood there, jaw clenched, realizing the whole play had collapsed. Within 2 days, Rebecca had posted the financial breakdown at the local feed store. Out here, that's where news travels fastest. By the end of the week, everyone knew the patrol program was fake, the equipment was unauthorized, and the HOA had been bleeding them dry. Sandra called me in a panic, begging to settle things quietly. She admitted, in a cracked voice, that the HOA had been running a deficit for months, and she tried to cover it with these fake programs. Daryl, she said, just got carried away with the authority. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because the truth was, she wasn't just covering a shortfall. She was manipulating her neighbors, scaring them with fake power, and trespassing on my land. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. The final showdown came at another community meeting. Sandra sat in her SUV at the edge like she might bolt, while the rest of us gathered around. I held up the recordings and documents, laid it all out, and said, "This isn't about standards. It's about control. For 4 years you've been paying for a theater show run on my property." The reaction was immediate: anger, betrayal, voices rising one after another. Rebecca called for Sandra's removal. The deputy confirmed my right to terminate the lease, effective immediately. And in front of everyone, I tore down the chairwoman reserve sign, revealing the old visitor parking only underneath. That sign had been there all along. Sandra had just nailed her fake authority right over it. The silence that followed was heavy, final. People looked at Sandra, then at me, then back at her, and they knew. The play was over. That evening, I sat back on the porch in my uncle's chair, watching the meadow in the fading light. The pump house was just a pump house again. The mailbox cluster was no longer a stage for someone else's theater. For the first time, the land felt like it was mine, really mine. And maybe that's the lesson I carried. Authority only works if you let someone play the part. Real authority, the kind that comes with truth and law, doesn't need costumes or flashing lights. It just is. Now, I've told you my side, but I want to hear yours. Was I right to take it this far, to expose everything publicly, or should I have handled it quieter behind closed doors? Do you think people like Sandra deserve sympathy for being in over their heads, or accountability for the choices they made? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I'm genuinely curious where you stand. And if you've ever had neighbors cross the line, maybe you'll understand why sometimes the only way to stop theater is to put on a show of your own.